This scared the stock market so much. It went down, roughly lost 600 billion in market cap in one day. This is the most that any stock company has lost in market capitalization in the history of the stock market. DeepSeek did not spend billions of dollars building infrastructure. They spent less than $5 million in under a year to create a model that was comparable to ChatGPT. Well, how did they do this? Distillation. And the reason why this was done is because the Chinese could not get access to these more expensive chips. So they had to work with what they had and create an engineering problem around that. And that's where distillation came in. Why is it important for you to watch this video? Well, I'm going to go over 3 things for you today. First, I'm going to go over the basics of artificial intelligence, or AI. Next, we'll get into what is going on with AI and the changes that have happened since my last update. And number 3, I'm going to be specific about the use cases of AI and how it's benefiting healthcare. So let's get into a little bit about the basics of AI. Previously, I did a video on AI and healthcare back in 2023 and again in 2024. So I figured it was time to go back again to 2025 and understand a little bit what's happened since the last time I gave this. So one of the things I saw since the last time we talked about AI was just this advanced usage beyond just ChatGPT and other chatbot functionalities, right? So a bit of review. If you remember correctly, AI bots are driven really by the release of OpenAI back in November of 2023. ChatGPT just exploded in the scene and everyone's super excited to see this magical chatbot give us answers by putting a few words into a small little screen. Look, we're going to go into this again. So what is ChatGPT? How does it work? Large language model. So let's talk about that again. And I have my handy dandy highlight here, right? So large language models are basically looking at understanding the neurons that go in, that mimic the neurons that come into the brain. So just like a human being, a baby, they're undeveloped, right? So they have no connections. So the first step is creating all these connections. And that's what these LLMs or large language models do. But they may not understand how they all work together. So you need a teacher or a human being, that's that smiley face there, that gets into exactly what does this entail, right? And so that human being is telling them, hey, you know, you got this context wrong. Remember an example I gave? I talked about the difference between server and server. Just depends on the sentence. And then finally, you get that understanding, make better connections. Then you finally have artificial intelligence, where it seems like it understands what you're saying, but really it's a predictive model based on the connections it's made over millions, billions, and even trillions of data sets. So that's large language models at its core and how they develop over the last, year or so. Well, since that time, we had these earlier versions of ChatGPT. I think they were versions 3.0 and 4.5 were built this way, right? But newer editions like version 4.0 were introduced to handle what they call multimodal. And this is basically not just taking text images and messaging, but actually being able to read images, right? And that took it to the next level. Then ChatGPT decided to do something different. They decided to release these new O1 and O3 models. So what does that mean? They use like training processes focused on which involves what they call reinforcement learning. So basically, this is like it came with a connection and then it said, hey, I think this is the right connection. So it did it on its own. But then there were reward-based systems. So basic human or another AI model that said, no, that's not the right connection. I want you to make it this way. So it gave it a reward or punishment depending on that connection that it made. So these reinforcement learning algorithms help the AI to learn faster and faster. So now when you go into these O1 and O3 models in ChatGPT, you're noticing that they're kind of thinking through how they're coming up with their analysis. And I think this is really important because as AI starts to evolve, we're going to start seeing more and more of these models. And the more it seems like it's thinking and appears like a human being, the more useful they become. Just like there has to be a lag sometimes in understanding like where this come from, is really important for these AIs to kind of come up with a reasoning behind it. And so that's what's important with these reasoning models, right? So we're going to see more of that coming in the forefront, where it's going to kind of seem like it's thinking as it comes up with the answer for you. One of the other things too is that we're seeing the increase in what they call closed systems versus open systems. So not to be confused with open AI, right? But really closed systems are proprietary systems, right? These are basically ChatGPT. This is Claude from Anthropic. This is a company. They built their own algorithms and models. We have no visibility how they've done it. They're just proprietary systems. They just work, right? Not unlike Microsoft software, right? You have no access to the code, so you have no clue on what's going on, how it works. Likewise, these proprietary systems dominated for a while, right? Because they were the only things out there. So people use them and wonder it. But guess what? Software is unique and different. You're starting to see more and more what they call open systems, open algorithms. And so what does this look like, right? So if you kind of go back to my handy dandy kind of example, open AI systems are basically like a potluck dinner, right? You can bring, everyone has their ideas that you can bring into the potluck, right? Different versions of it, different things that you can add to it. And this allows for more flexibility and openness to kind of make the AI what it is. Everybody has visibility into the table of what you bring, and everyone can take things from it, add to it, and make it better for the whole community, but it's all visible. And so some of the huge models that are already kind of doing this, you have Meta Llama, which is an open system. So Facebook has open AI system you can use. It's probably the most used one. There's a ChatGPT clone, Neo, that people are using that's open. And something very new, DeepSeek has R1. That's the most latest open model. And there's some controversy around it. I'll get to in a second. But this is kind of how these open AI systems work. And, really kind of get into the weeds of that. I think one of the things you want to think about is like open AI systems are really important for industry specific, like healthcare, because the thing that we're seeing right now is industries have unique needs and industries have a unique models that they need to kind of emulate in order to make it useful. So for instance, healthcare, one of the big things is understanding, protecting patient health information, HIPAA, PHI. This is really important. And so having a customized model that can kind of make better connections around protecting patient data will make it a more effective model for healthcare. And you see that all other industries like transportation or logistics, there's certain connections that have to be made because it's just core and fundamental to the industry, as opposed to a general proprietary model where it's kind of more around basic human understanding of language, mathematics, things like that, where you may want to have deeper connections if you're trying to build like a healthcare AI system. And so one of the things too is also open AIs. Obviously, we talked about the customization for industry, but also they're just so cheap. They are open because people are creating in real time how they're going to operate. And you're going to see different things around openness of how you can kind of create cheaper versions of what you have. And how do they make these connections, you may ask? Well, one of the things they do is this concept called weights. Weights are basically creating connections that are a little bit stronger than others and give them certain weights. So when you open an AI model system, you can actually program that weight. So for instance, let's say if you want a higher connection. So for instance, if the color blue indicates wellness, anytime the AI understands blue, it will connect that to wellness, then you make that weight a little bit stronger and healthier. So that basically that's what they will assume every time. Just like there's certain connections we make in our world, brands, right? You think about Tom Brady, he's a big brand. You think of excellence, right? You think of longevity, you think of the GOAT. That's similarly, you want to have weights which are kind of tying connections a little bit tighter inside the AI model. And that's super important. And that's what happens in open systems where you can kind of set those weights as you will based on your industry specific knowledge. And that's very important. But I was talking about like cheapness. So what does that mean, right? If you kind of go back to my handy dandy board, let's kind of talk about that cheapness. AI pricing is really based on a token system. If you can see here, right, you kind of think about tokens. One token equals one word, right? When you have a closed system like ChatGPT, what you're looking at is basically $40 per 1 minute input token. So every time you put a word inside ChatGPT, if you're trying to use it for your software, they're going to charge you $40 for up to 1 million words inputting into that system. So as you can see, it can get very expensive pretty quickly if you got billions of these going on at one time inside your application. Then they're charging even more for output. So basically, it's going to be more because the AI is doing computations, understanding knowledge, and spitting something back out that's useful. It's going to be $80 per 1 million tokens. Now, that's just a closed system, but Meta, Llama, as of this recording, right, these prices are always changing, $5.33, right, for 1 million tokens, input tokens. Then when you look at output, $16 per 1 million output tokens. Wow, that's an order of magnitude of what, eight, almost seven that you're saving in pricing when it comes to an open system versus a closed system. Obviously, open systems are a little bit more complicated. You need more technical know-how, but the power is in open systems. And that's what we're seeing going. As a matter of fact, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, recently spoken on a Ask Me Anything on a Reddit chain. He talked about how maybe OpenAI is on the wrong side of history. We're going for a proprietary model. So there's hints that they're looking at going down more open models and thinking about that for the future. But you know what? It may be too late for them. And I'll talk to you a little bit about why that is, right? So let's talk about what is currently going on in the AI market. What's happening right now, we just talked about this whole debate between open source and closed source and all that. Well, there's a recent model we just talked about, DeepSeek, which is a Chinese-based company, created a new model called R1. R1 is an open source AI model, right? And it really surprised Silicon Valley recently because based on benchmark testing, it was comparable to proprietary models that spend billions and billions of dollars on their models, right? So that's the ChatGPT, Google's Gemini. They were able to kind of compete on these benchmarks, which based on different categories like understanding of language. How do you do reasoning? How do you do advanced mathematics? And these are things that were, people thought it takes billions of dollars to build out the infrastructure. I'm talking about using very expensive NVIDIA chips, building out these data centers, do all these computations, create these vast amount of connections in order to make it happen. But guess what? DeepSeek did not spend billions of dollars building infrastructure. They spent less than $5 million in under a year to create a model that was comparable to ChatGPT. Well, how do they do this? Well, there's a process, it's called distillation. And this is very similar to what you may see in any type of model when they're trying to understand how to speed up the learning process. Matter of fact, this scared the stock market so much. NVIDIA, it went down, roughly lost 600 billion in market cap in one day. This is the most that any stock company has lost in market capitalization in the history of the stock market. $600 billion was gone in a day. Now it's recovered since then as it's recording, but that's how much this understanding shook the whole industry when it comes to like the assumption of what you can do and build out these models. And the reason why this was done is because the Chinese could not get access to these more expensive chips. So they had to work with what they had and create an engineering problem around that. And that's where distillation came in. And so what is that all about, right? And so you go back to my handy dandy chart. Distillation is basically where you have two models, right? You have a teacher and a student. The teacher, like a ChatGPT, it takes inputs in, right? And then creates outputs, right? We talked about that. You type in something into ChatGPT, it spits out something outside. Well, you have a student model, in this case, R1, that's getting the same inputs as ChatGPT, but they're also saying, hey, let me see what the outputs were that ChatGPT came out with. And then it reverse engineers to create the same outputs. And then it's creating its own connections based on that analysis, right? So it's kind of reverse engineering. In essence, think about it like a D student that's sitting behind an A student copying off their paper, and they both get A's, right? And it's very similar. Obviously, OpenAI did not like that. And it's very hard to prevent companies from doing distillation because you really have to do things like rate limiting the internet and preventing other companies from getting access to the outputs. But it's very hard to do, right? And so you're seeing more and more of these smaller based models get on par pretty quickly. So it's almost like the A student does all the work, OpenAI, right, to get smarter and smarter. And then these smaller models are just copying their homework, right? And that's what happened here. And so that's how R1 is able to hit the mark. And then more importantly, it was an open system. So now everyone can kind of see how it was building out his connections, and also maybe can adjust his weight to make better connections. And so, matter of fact, this R1, when we're recording this, it was number one in the Apple App Store, right? Because of that. And so, like I said, this is changing the model of how fast, you can build out these models. And that's something that's really shook the industry. And so we'll see more proliferation of AI tools and people getting super excited of how they can use AI and how they can adjust to it over time because more and more companies are realizing that, hey, these are tools that is the infrastructure is really going to be almost a commodity. And if you had just good enough AI model underneath your software tech, then that could really open up the market for new and exciting tools. The other thing that kind of happened recently is the rise of what they call AI agents, right? So computer use agents or CUIs, they're basically software programs that utilize AI to interact with the environment, in this case, web browsers, right? To do human being type tasks. ChatGPT just released their pro version and they have their kind of what they call AI agent that they just released, Operator. But Claude from Anthropic, they also have their version of computer use. And basically you do things like order flowers for your wife, create a plane ticket for your next travel day. So everything, an assistant can do, right? And we're seeing right now, these are early days, there's some basic things it can do, but eventually we may see it do more and more complicated tasks like create whole PowerPoint presentations for you or do furthermore research and create these nice PDFs. It can do something like that now, but I'm talking about at a high level where it's almost indistinguishable between a high-end intern or research assistant. And so this computer use is something that's really going to automate tasks that you normally would have gave to a human being. And we're starting to see more of that coming to the forefront here in 2025. And this is useful in many different applications as you can imagine. So let's go into how is healthcare using artificial intelligence as of this recording. So AI is being used all over the place in healthcare currently right now. Still early days, right? Because healthcare is slow to adapt to new technology, as we spoke about previously. So, for instance, one example is cancer detection, right, with medical imaging. One of the things that we're seeing is AI is helping read X-rays more effectively, understanding what's happening and doing predictive modeling to understand, is this a malignant tumor that is going to grow based on analysis of millions and millions of images they've seen throughout the decades that's ingested into the system. This is important because this can help. For instance, in UK, they use AI and they were on the 700,000 mammograms, and a similar in that case, they were able to kind of mitigate against breast cancer in thousands of women in the UK. And they're trying to bring that here with some of the models that they're building out. So that's one way, early cancer detection. Another one is predicting outcomes to shorten hospital stays. How do you do that? This is a huge problem in healthcare. If a patient stays in the hospital longer, there could be other complications. Sepsis is a big issue. So what do? They're looking at doing predictive modeling, understanding what's happened before and determining what's the likelihood that patient stay in the hospital a long period of time. And so patients can leave out sooner. So that definitely lowers the cost of care because the longer patient stays in there, the more cost to insurer or the payer to keep that patient inside the hospital. One study showed that using AI can absolutely cut the hospital stay by up to 2/3 of a day per patient and could save millions of dollars per year because now it's kind of doing things automatically to kind of make sure the patient gets their meds sent, automating the process of alerting the patient to different things, doing discharge procedures a little bit faster. All that can be implemented now with the use of artificial intelligence. Another use case is remote patient monitoring. This is near and dear to my heart because this is a solution that we use and we promote with our company SensorMed. One of the things that we use is blood pressure cuffs, glucose monitors. And the reason why that's important is because the ability to kind of use that information and feed that back into your system, you can do predictive understanding of how likely is a patient's uncontrollable hypertension to continue. How likely is their blood sugars to spike up based on the data set that you're reading? And this is giving real insight to help our patients and more importantly, the healthcare organizations we work with determine things like, sugar levels. If the patient is going to have an exacerbation, if they're on, say, for instance, they have COPD, are there going to be issues with the patient from their sugar levels and growing to higher than 6.7% and getting to full-blown diabetes? All these are super important because you want to make sure that blood sugar is lower, and using AI can help with that when it comes to remote patient monitoring. And finally, one of the big things that we're seeing is these AI-powered virtual scribes, right, for doctors. So if you've ever been to the hospital or to the doctor's office, a lot of times they're just sitting there talking to you, but there's a big screen in front of you. Reason why is because they're trying to chart. In other words, they're trying to write down everything that's happening to that patient or that's happening to you while the doctor's communicating. So let's say I went to go see orthopedic not too long ago. And so they had to understand, okay, do I have a meniscus tear? What happened? So all things that's going to go into that as they're talking to you, so that number one, helps with billing, so they can know exactly what procedures, and every procedure there is a CPT code, a billable code that's tied to that. So that's important. But also it understands, what's the standard of care. So once they kind of have that document, then it can be looked into a database to determine what the doctor recommending the usual standard of care for a patient like me or like you. But what's happening is they're spending so much time in front of the computer, they don't have time to really have that connection with the patient. A lot of times, some doctors I've seen, have medical assistants that come in and kind of do that for them while they're looking at you in the face and really examining you. But in some cases, some organizations don't have that extra medical assistant. They're doing other tasks or extra LPN, licensed practical nurse. So what they seeing the proliferation of these AI scribes. So basically, as the doctor's talking, the information is recording everything he's saying, and then in real time, kind of doing a lot of the billing, but more importantly, tying it to standards of care, evidence-based standards of care for you in that scenario. So when they review their chart notes later and add to it later, they see everything that was spoken to the patient. So we're seeing more and more of that really becoming the forefront when it comes to doctors, because a lot of doctors, really pride themselves on having that patient to doctor communication channel. And so having the AI scribe is really seeing more and more use cases. So I would say this: if you're thinking about AI and this is something that you want to implement into your healthcare organization, absolutely, this is something that you should start down the path of, because it's leaving you behind. You need to understand the basics of it. You need to understand how is it changing near real time. And then more important, you need to understand the application, how to use it inside your medical healthcare organization. And this is something that we talk about a lot of time on this channel. So definitely go look at some of the other videos, get the basics of AI down and understand what's next. And also put in the comments and like this and let us know how are you using artificial intelligence in your healthcare organization. So if you like this content, definitely there's more content where we talk a little bit more about how an actual medical doctor influencer is using it, and I give my comments. So go check that video out next.